from the nude Dvar Malchus. And we will be okay, let us commence. Theater Shmaya, Shabbos Parshas Tazria, Rosh Chodesh Nisan Tafshich Chafei. This mimer is a Mogadik mimer, and we shall begin. So our parsha begins with the each Tazria V'Yolda Zachar, a woman that will become Tazria, she'll become impregnated, and she will give birth to a male child. So there's a different halachas pertaining to the male child, which including the first thing that he said is bringing that the type of tumah v'tara, the difference between a male child and a female child. But the first thing before that is about Bismillah and so on. Razal, why does it say Isha kisazriya v'yolda zacher? Why does it just go straight to the point that if a woman gives birth to a male child, so then the halachas are such and such? Why does it begin with the words Isha kisazriya? It says Isha mazras tchila. The woman is just translated literally, becomes the seeds first. She gives birth to a male. That's the type of child that's born, is a male child. And a man that gives the seed first, then she gives birth to a woman, to a female child. Maybe Admor Zachen could the Torah and the Alter Rebbe brings the Torah and the Maimer by the same title. Philosophers, philosophers, scientists of his day, and so on explained it. The reason why, if a woman is mazras tchila, she gives birth to a male child. If isha mazras tchila, because when the woman comes first, so then the droplet of the man comes last. Therefore, the one on top overpowers the bottom, and it goes after the male child. It goes after the father. And Alter Rebbe says that explanation of these philosophers, scientists, etc., is very difficult. It's and Mefarish, and he explains differently. Like it's obvious from the simple language of the pasuk or the language of the Chazal that the actual birth of the male child comes from the woman's seed or impregnation and so on. And not from the fact that the husband's impregnation or seed comes last. So now the Rebbe is going to explain all of these things spiritually, including the reason why we have the whole idea of, first of all, the whole concept of the man and woman and what they give and what they cause to be born in the spiritual sense, and what the two explanations of it that Alter Rebbe poses in the Torah, the one that he does not accept and the one that he accepts, also how they have their sources in the spiritual realm. So he says, line 11, middle of the page, Shlomo, we could say, maybe look at the Torah, Gamma Pirish, the latest Zach, the fact that look at the Torah, he brings also the explanation that the birth of the male child comes from the droplet of the man. Haba Bachreina comes at last. Law govern because the one that's on top, the one that comes last, is the one that overpowers. We say them is even more so. And he even prefaces this explanation to the explanation that he does accept that the birth of a male child comes from the woman's seed. So in other words, the Alter Rebbe is not a science track, and he's not here to explain different disagreements in the scientific, biological makeup and how a male child is born, etc., etc. Therefore, the very fact that Alter Rebbe even discusses what the scientists, philosophers, biologists believe, which is something that the Alter Rebbe, when he speaks about a lot of physical phenomena, I'm sure there's many disagreements even in his day about how science viewed it differently. And he doesn't necessarily go into what others have to say about it and so on. I do recall one time offhand, but that's more the exception about gravity or the idea of why things fall to the ground and so on. But again, the Alter Rebbe is not, it's not his place, it's not his purpose to go ahead and compare scientific theories with Mamar Chazal, et cetera, or the interpretations of Mamar Chazal and so on. And especially to give preface and precedence to the Pirush that he does not accept. Also, the fact that it doesn't make sense, also because when it's first, that means it has a stronger validity. So the idea that the Rebbe is going to express is because there is a certain validity to both ideas spiritually, and that's why the Alter Rebbe shares this with us. Who, line 15, why does he do so? Why does he include it? And why does he say it first? Ish ve'isha beruchni is because man and woman spiritually and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Knesset Yisrael, it's Hashem, and the Knesset Yisrael, all the Neshamas Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu nikra b'shem ish. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is called a man. The Knesset Yisrael b'shem isha, and the Klal Yisrael is called the woman, the receiver. And it's known concerning what we speak about, the inspiration that comes from above versus the inspiration that comes from below. In other words, the inspiration that Hashem inspires us to do something versus the inspiration that we on our own reach and come to be connected to Hashem and to have a service of Hashem and so on. There are two modes and two ways of looking at it. Which is better, which is greater. And each one, Chassidus explains, has an advantage over the other. And each one of them, there's an advantage over the other. The advantage and the inspiration from down below is that hamshacha that comes about through the inspiration from below, that comes from an inner level of the light. In other words, it's such a type of level that really is something that permeates, and he had been making himself a receptacle, and therefore the way it comes down into the person is in such a way that it permeates. And the advantage in inspiration from above on its own, without our evoking it and drawing this down, it comes down from such a high place that inspiration from below cannot reach over there. The point is that Nivraim, created beings, can only reach to the root and the source of where Nivraim come from, whether it's Noel Mabriya or maybe higher Noel Matzilus, but no higher than that, because they have no entree over there, they have no connection over there, that's not associated with them whatsoever. So when it says Sato, I can only reach so high. But when the inspiration comes from above, when Hashem is the one that inspires us, so Hashem is not limited. He can bring down that inspiration from the highest, most levels. He can bring down a revelation from the highest, most levels. So that revelation of godly light, of Yisrusa de La'ela, is such that it can come from the most infinite and highest levels. Yet, it is lacking in comparison to the Srusla Asata. This Srusla Asata, we said, comes in a pneumistic way, in a way that it's internalized. But when it talks about Srusla Ela, he says in the parentheses in the bottom of the page, the way it comes down, the Hamshach over there is from an external level. It doesn't permeate. The person did not make himself an appropriate vessel, etc., to be able to take it in. And it's way beyond his level. So therefore, it is only an external type of manifestation of the light. Yes, like Mars, the Rebbe goes on to say, that is what's in the Torah about it. The Rebbe adds to this, top of page 12, Yes, like Mars, from this understanding of Isrus Sata, Isrus La'ela, and Hashem being likened to the husband, and Knesset Yisrael being likened to the wife. So with this could be understood, the two explanations in that phrase at the beginning of our parasha, Isha Kisazriya V'Yolda Zach. That Pirish, ladies Hazacher Mizera is the log of the explanation that the Alter Rebbe quoted from philosophers, that how does a male child, how is he born? It's born from the droplet that comes from the husband, because that comes the last, and that is the higher one, that is the final one, that overpowers what was there before. That descends by way of a chain descent from the advantage and the quality of the inspiration from below. In other words, the fact that Isrus Ela has a greater advantage in one point over Isrus Sata. So from that came about the understanding of the philosophers, whether they realized it or not, that it's the man that's responsible for the Zachar to be born, for the male child to be born. And the explanation that the birth of a male child comes from the seed of the woman itself, the way the Alter Rebbe says, and the way it's the simple reading of the text, and also the simple reading of the Maimer Chazal, that's the woman herself, that her seed is seeding, tazriya, however you want to translate it, makes the birth of the male child. That comes as a result of the advantage that's to be found, that inspiration down here below. The inspiration down here below is a more internal and permeating type of hamshacha, and therefore that is the meaning, and that is the reasoning behind why down here in the world we have that type of explanation and that type of approach, that the woman, meaning the Sata, is the one that brings about the male child. Maybe therefore, because these two explanations correspond to both the contrasting qualities that's to be found by Yisrael Ela versus Yisrael Sata. So because of that, the Alter Rebbe, the Torah brings down both explanations. He brings also the explanation that the birth of the male child comes from the man's seed, after Begashmis Pirizeh, who like the Maskana, though physically this explanation is not the final conclusion, because the final conclusion physically is that it doesn't come from the man, from the husband. Is why does the Alter Rebbe bring it? That's the hint. There's also an advantage in an inspiration from above. Okay, let's open up to questions, but please, I cannot answer any biological questions and how this fits in with present day science. Let's not spend time on that at this moment. Any questions on the content of what the Maimer is trying to explain?
I didn't understand the last part. If Isarusa de Leila is stronger, that makes a male. That I get it.
What the last part I was trying to say is that since each one has an advantage that the other one doesn't have, Isrus Leila has an advantage that comes from a higher level. And Isrus Sata, his advantage is it's a more pneumius level. It permeates the person more, though it's not higher. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe brings in the physical reasons of why a woman would give birth to a male child, two approaches. Whether it comes from the male, which means the Surstala Ela is the cause, or whether it comes from the female, which means the Surstala Sata is the cause. In other words, the male child is the ideal, because the male child represents in the Mamorim over there about a constant love and awe of Hashem that remains with them, etc., etc. So the male is the ideal child. So the birth of love and awe of Hashem in a way that's a male child can either be attributed to Yisrustala Ela or Yisrustala Sata. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe enumerates both the advantages of Yisrustala Ela, which is understood from the physical example of the philosophers, even though he rejects it to give us the physical example of the woman being the one that's responsible for the male child, that ultimately it's the Yisrustala Sata that's the one that's responsible for the male child being born. Okay, Ois base, line 11, page 1. Yes, if we could add the Parshas Tazria, Parshas Tazria we read in many years, in the month of Nis. The difference between Nisan and Tishrei is Nisan represents the inspiration from above, because Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. It's the avoid of tzaddikim, it says. It's not the avoid of Baal Tshuva, which is Tishrei, which is our avodah, but it's coming from above. Hashem took us out of the Memtev Shari Tumah, out of the 49 gates of Tumah. Maybe Pirish Zeshaledis Hazachar Mezara Ish. Lefnei HaPirish Shaledis Hazachar Mezara Ish. Therefore, he brings this explanation that the birth of a male child comes from the seed of the man, before the explanation that the birth of a male child is from the seed of the woman, because because in the month of Nisan, the emphasis is on the advantage of the inspiration from above. Like we've mentioned at different times, that the Rebbe Rashab, I think, was asked, maybe by Friedrich Rebbe, how is it that in different times of the year, it seems to be when you learn, when it's Pesach, all of a sudden Pesach is the highest time of the year and the greatest revelations. And it's Tishrei, you find out Rosh Hashanah is the highest, and Shavuos the highest. Which is the highest? So the Rebbe Rashab explained, I think it was from the Rebbe Rashab, that in every Yom Tov is Meir, the oil of that Yom Tov. So when the oil of that Yom Tov is Meir, so then that's the highest time. So in a similar vein over here, we're in the month of Nisan. And Nisan, what's primary is the Chodesh, this part Tazriya we read in the month of Nisan. So therefore, in the month of Nisan, it's Meir, it shines the quality and the advantage of a Sustalela. So therefore, the first explanation the Alter Rebbe brings is the advantage of the Zachar, that the male child is born because of the male, because of the husband, because of the Eibishter, the Sustalela. Line 17. And the fact that the conclusion of the Alter Rebbe is that the birth of the male child comes from the woman, because once it's after Matan Torah, true. Chodesh Nisan represents the inspiration from above, because Yidden were taken out of Mitzrayim despite their being immersed in 49 gates of Tumah. But that was all prior to Matan Torah. Post Matan Torah, even in the month of Nisan, his emphasis is emphasized the advantage of the service of a person, inspiration down here below. The Rebbe brings a Kamuvim Gamma Maimer Divra Maskal Chodesh Lad Mor Rashab Nishmas Eid, like it's also understood from the Maimer entitled HaChodesh of the Rebbe Rashab. Baal Lula the Beis Nisan, the one whose yahrzeit is on Beis Nisan, also during the month of Nisan. That he asked over at the beginning of the Maimer. Why does one need service by their own power? What is the advantage that we have to do the work? Why shouldn't it be just given to us? Why shouldn't they just inspire us? Isn't the love and awe that comes from above much higher, like we explained before, that a person's a person's own love and awe of Hashem can only come from the root and the source where creations come from, as opposed to the revelation from above that Hashem can bring from the highest, most levels. So the very fact that the Rebbe Rashab asks, what is the advantage at all of the avodah by one's own power? Though many Mamarim, it's already explained, like we mentioned previously, the advantage and the quality of inspiration down here below. So why does he ask this when it's seemingly something that's like dealt with already in so many Mamarim? Top of page 9. If we could say, because in the Maimer that's entitled Chodesh, over there is emphasized the advantage and the quality of inspiration from above, because that's the idea of the month of Nisan, HaChodesh. Therefore, in a Maimer of the month of Nisan, a Maimer that's entitled, that has to do with the month of Nisan, so then there's room to ask, what type of advantage is there in avodah, in something that's coming from below? But for the very fact that this is not the conclusion is not that the revelation of a love and awe from above is the greater one. It's only a question that that's what should be, but he doesn't remain with that as a conclusion. Moving, it's understood. Even in the month of Nisan, which is because the Maimer is titled Lachodesh, so it's therefore dealing with the month of Nisan. That in the month of Nisan is emphasized the Amshach that comes from above. Despite that, the conclusion is there is also an advantage in the service by one's own power. It's the inspiration from down here below. In comparison to the love and awe that comes from above, inspiration from above. Why? Because, like we said before, it's post Matan Torah. Post Matan Torah, even the month of Nisan, even which before Matan Torah was from above, needs to be done from below as well. Even more so, the Indians had this idea that the advantage of the inspiration from down here below, that is the primary quality, even though we said before at the beginning of the Maimon, that there's an advantage to each one of them. This has one advantage, that has the other advantage. The Rustal Leila has the advantage that comes from a higher place. This Rustal Asata has the advantage that it permeates, it's more pnimi. So one might think, okay, they're the same. This has one quality, this has another quality. They're equal. The Rebbe says no. Despite the fact that we said before that each one has their own quality, still in all, the main quality is to be found by Surah Sata, by our avodah, the work that we have to do. Therefore, the conclusion look at the Torah is not like the philosophy. That the birth of a male child comes from the seed of the woman. The advantage of the inspiration down here below. Any questions? Okay, middle of page Zayin is Gimel. The idea behind this is the Hine. Why is that the ultimate advantage? Why is the Isrustul the between the two, the higher or the more important advantage? The advantage of the inspiration of above that comes on its own is the Hamshachim is that Hamshach is from a place that the inspiration from below does not reach over there. Like we said before, that's what happens with Surah Leila. Surah Leila means Hashem is the one that's awakening us. When Hashem is awakening us, it's not limited to where he can awaken us from, what type of Hamshach he can bring down to inspire us. When we are the one that are doing it, so then we have a limitation. We can only reach to a certain level, no higher than that. The Shverish HaNevroim we can reach, Alter Rebbe says. So he says, since it's coming from a place that is the Sata cannot reach over there, and the Amshach is coming just because Hashem desired to do kindness. Hashem desires kindness, and therefore He's benevolent and gives from the highest, most levels. According to what it's known, that when Hashem wanted to create the world, so who did He consult? He consulted the neshamas of tzaddik. It doesn't just mean individual people that we call tzaddikim, but the tzaddikim that's referred to over there in Maimer Chazal, the Rebbe added in the parentheses, va'amech kulam tzaddikim, that your entire nation are tzaddik. So the Eibishter consulted Klal Yisrael before he created the world. This means that even the fact that Hashem became inspired to be desirous of doing kindness, to be desirous of doing kindness, there has to be a creation that you're doing kindness to. So before you could even have that creation that you're doing kindness to, there had to be a decision to create. And that decision to create came from the neshamas of Klal Yisrael, who the Eibishter consulted before he created. It's because it arose in his thought, which is a thought of Hashem's essence that is beyond the revelation of He desires kindness. that the Yidden will fulfill Torah mitzvahs, and they will make a home down here below for the Eibush. In other words, what does it mean that Hashem consulted the tzaddikim? It doesn't mean that Hashem called in the tzaddikim of Klal Yisrael to a board meeting and he asked, "What's your opinion?" What it means is that Hashem looked at what the tzaddikim with Klal Yisrael would accomplish, and he saw that the Yidden would accomplish and make a home down here below through the avodah of Torah mitzvahs, and that is what caused them to choose and decide to create the world. Therefore, it's understood that this idea that the Yidden's fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, the Yidden's making a home for the Eibush down here below, is rooted even higher than the Sarusa de la Eila that comes from Chafetz Chesed, like we said before. That decision to make the world comes prior to Hashem's desire to do kindness, which is the area from which the Sarusa de la Eila, without a Sarusa de la Sata, comes from. The root of the service of the Yidden is much higher even than the idea of he desires kindness. Through the revelation that Hashem desires kindness, through that woke up and became drawn down, and through the fact that the revelation of Chafetz Chesed was inspired and came down through the avoid of a person, because like we said before, first the Eibishter had to consult Yidden. The consultation of the Yidden was that he saw that he did Torah mitzvahs. It comes out that the Yidden's doing Torah mitzvahs was what caused the Srus de la Eila of Hashem's Chafetz Chesed. Therefore, it's added in that revelation, in that Chafetz Chesed, it's added a greater elevation than the way this revelation is on its own, mitzad al-maila, top of the next page, as it is from above. In other words, that if we would only have the Chafetz Chesed alone, so then it wouldn't be as high as the fact that the Chafetz Chesed is now beholden to the avodah of Torah mitzvahs. Because the avodah of Torah mitzvahs, he said in the previous parentheses, comes from Hashem's essential thought that preceded even the Chafetz Chesed. So therefore, this Rus de la Eila that comes just because of Chafetz Chesed is not as high as what we impact that is Rus de la Eila. It comes into this Chafetz Chesed in that is Rus de la Eila that's on its own, comes in from the essential thought that is beyond revelation. The essential thought means what the Eibush always says, Allah, the machshava, that it arose in Hashem's thought to create the Yidden and so on and so forth. According to this, we could explain the fact that in the month of Nisan, the idea of the month of Nisan is drawing down from above. We read that it says a woman that will will have seed and she will give birth to a male. The emphasis in the advantage of Israel Sata. Why is it that way? How does it fit? Why in the month of Nisan, which is Israel Elam, do we have the idea emphasize so much Israel Sata? In other words, he's giving a deeper reason. Before he said, because now after Matan Torah, the main thing is even Chodesh Nisan is about Israel Sata, but still Chodesh Nisan is also about Israel Eila. Why do we emphasize in the month of Nisan specifically, not just also, but specifically in the month of Nisan, the advantage of Israel Sata? Ikara ilibam shachem al maila vagil de Chafetz Chesed, the main quality in the drawing down from above, the revelation that desires kindness, is kishinim shechsai de avoida, when it comes down through avoida, when it comes down through service. So then when we have that higher revelation that comes down through service, so that is the advantage, and that's putting together the Chodesh Nisan, that's the Chafetz Chesed, that's desire that comes from above. And what we are adding to it is because we're talking about Isha Tazriya, that it's all thanks to the woman, all thanks to Knesset Yisrael, all thanks to Yisrus Sata, because then the Yisrus Eila of Nisan has a much greater quality. Any questions? Okay, sei gesund. You'll see me much from tomorrow.
Well, I have a question.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Does the fact that there were mitzvahs before